afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Ashley Sullivan, the Events and Educational Program Coordinator at Wolf & Company, and I'll be your host for today's webinar on Goodbye RFP, Hello Smart Vendor Selection. We are very excited to be co-hosting today's webinar with Paladin FS. Before I introduce today's presenters, I'd like to go over some housekeeping items. Today's presentation will last about 45 minutes, and the slides can be downloaded at www.wolfandco.com/news/webinar_library. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please send them in to me by using the questions box, which is located on the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. You have two options for audio today. You may dial in by phone or listen through your computer. Our audience will be muted during the session, so if you need to communicate with me at any point throughout the webinar, please do so by using the chat box, also located on the webinar's control panel. I'd now like to give a brief background of Wolf & Company. We were established in 1911 and are very excited to have just celebrated our 100th anniversary. We provide our clients with assurance, tax, business consulting, and risk management services. We have over 180 professionals working for the firm and have offices in Boston and Springfield, Massachusetts, and Albany, New York. We currently employ over 45 risk management professionals in the areas of IT assurance, internal audit, regulatory compliance, and Wolfpack integrated risk management, and provide services to over 200 financial institutions in 19 different states and 1 U.S. territory. And I'd now like to introduce today's presenters. Aaron Silva, an expert in the vendor industry, having held several senior executive positions with technology vendors servicing the community financial industry throughout his 21-year career. He serves as the president of Paladin, a national research and consultancy firm. Also here with us today is Bob Moreau, a Paladin core business analyst. Bob has served 13 years in the community financial industry, and his expertise includes bank operations, core services, compliance, IT infrastructure, contract negotiations, and vendor selection, which is obviously what we're here to speak about today. So we are thrilled to have you both presenting on smart vendor selection, and I will now hand the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Ashley, and good day to everybody. Bob Moreau, thank you for joining. I think it's clear that Bob takes a very fuzzy picture. Bob, are you there?
I am.
Good. Just a brief background about us. If you don't know Paladin, we are all former vendor executives. We spent our careers up until Paladin selling technology services, core and IT services to community banks and credit unions all across the U.S. We switched sides back in 2008, and we provide research and services specifically to senior executives of these institutions that are trying to calculate whether they should, what they should do with their current vendors. We only focus on technology. We only work in market under $5 billion in assets. Our goal is to provide decision intelligence, and we're the only company we're aware of that was founded to build what we call our Blue Book of Decision Intelligence, a pricing database of market intelligence and information on every single core service provider in the country. Well, thank you again for joining us today. This is Aaron Silva speaking. I will be emceeing the program, and Bob and I will be exchanging different speaking opportunities as we go throughout. But our agenda is very high level here. We want to first educate you with a little bit of our research that we hope you find interesting, talk about the business problem and why smart vendor selection is now a much better option to use these days. A few slides about critical thinking. We'll talk about the notion of why the RFP, or the classical request for proposal, is dead, and in our opinion, and then we'll conclude at the end. As we go through the program, there will be a few stopping points to take a brief poll, and this is our first one here. And we're taking this poll specifically at the time that we want to define something for you, and that is, when we use the word core or core services in our presentation, what Bob and I mean are any of the services you see under that. Account processing, sometimes known as data processing, item, internet banking, bill payment, ATM and EFT services. That to us is core. When we say IT services, what we're talking about are managed services, typically relegated to the LAN, WAN, telecom, or branch network infrastructures. So we say core and IT. This is what we're talking, and I'll hand it over to Ashley to conduct this brief poll.
Okay, great. So the first poll we have for our audience: does your institution insource or outsource your account and item processing services? So we're going to leave this open for about 30 seconds, and if the audience doesn't mind, just giving an answer to the poll, and then we will move on.
So the options are that they insource, which means they pay primarily maintenance and software contracts on software that they have in their institution. Outsourced is the opposite. The core handles everything for them. They just have a high-speed connection out to them. A hybrid means a little of both. It's very possible to be in-house core but outsourced internet banking, for example. You don't know, and of course, we'd respect your privacy if you'd rather not say.
Okay, and about, let's see, 19% answered that they insource. 58% answered that they outsource. 19% answered that they have a hybrid, some insource, some outsource. And 3% indicated that they'd rather not say.
All right.
And no one said that they don't know, so I suppose that's good.
We have a very smart audience here. Good, good. Bob, what do you think about those numbers?
You know, fairly indicative, especially with the size of organizations these days. And yes, the outsourced model seems to be the most preferable, so this is not surprising.
The ICBA says that 88% of all services are outsourced. So this is a little shy than that, but a strong sampling anyway, and we appreciate all of you for taking a second to click on those options. So let's talk about the business problem that we see from our perspective, and that is bank leaders today in 2011, unfortunately, are still relying upon legacy methods to gather decision intelligence about when to select a vendor and what vendor and which products to select. This assumption comes to us because of a few market realities that we observe and we communicate regularly through our research. First one is massive consolidation has greatly narrowed the number of choices that are available, and so the methods, the classical methods, that the legacy methods were based on there being potentially 50 vendors in the market. And in a minute we'll talk about that. RFPs, in our opinion, are pretty ineffective these days and unnecessary, especially in the age of information. We'll go into that here momentarily. And more so than ever, bankers don't have the time to manage a long RFP process or a drawn-out haggling session with vendors. There's got to be a better way to do it. But with all those realities in mind, the fact is banks and credit unions still have to change their products and services from time to time to remain competitive. So how is this done? Bob, any comments here?
You know, I will mention that when your last point there about the product change, I am seeing more of a frequency of the ancillary products outside of the core, surrounding the core, or the customer-facing type functions are those that are most in question these days.
Yeah, great point. And in a few slides, we'll talk a little bit about why we think that's happening. From time to time, as being researchers and consultants, people like Bob tend to believe that he knows more than everybody else, right, Bob? And so we're going to share a little cowboy wisdom. For those of you who don't know, Paladin was a cowboy, and if you're old enough to remember the shows, we can talk about it another time. But one of the pieces of wisdom we have is don't interfere with something that ain't bothering you none, and never ask a barber if you need a haircut. And specifically on that second point, vendors that aren't currently doing business with you are always going to tell you that changing to their system is the way to go. And we're former vendors, we know, this is in our blood, we've been trained to do this our entire careers, and it may not necessarily be the right thing to do. And there's another driving force that occurs. Sometimes institutions have a good-sized IT organization within their ranks. And for whatever reason, these organizations tend to drive a behavior of wanting to change for change's sake. And we're not sure why that is always. Sometimes we think it's because those IT folks want to remain purposeful. So before you begin the process of vendor change, you should be skeptical as possible to ask the question, do you need to change? And so for a couple slides here, Bob and I are going to try to talk you out of changing. And then if you do decide to change anyway, we're going to tell you how to do it through smart vendor selection. One of the first arguments we make about not changing has to do with research we've conducted, and this model shows this. Since the early 90s, demand for outsourced services has increased. 58% of you on the call today outsource. I'm sure back in the early 90s, that was probably much, much lower. As a result of consolidation and the fact that there are fewer vendors available to provide these services, the premiums have outpaced the demand for the outsourced services. This is basic economic theory. However, our research tells us that the fair market value for the services, the odds are for the fair market value of services you're using today are somewhere between 18 and 42% lower than what your invoice currently says. How do we know this? As a research company, we have completed over 150 assessments of institutions, just the same as the folks that are on this call. We've completed over 50 case studies and surveyed over 1,000 institutions multiple times per year to come to this. So the first point we'll make, before you decide to change, you may want, if you're happy with your current vendor, you may not need to change. You may get a far better price and not have to go through the conversion hassle. Bob, do you have anything to add here?
No, and once again, I think this shows where bankers are these days with needing the outsource and trying to eliminate those headaches with maintaining an in-house scenario, but also wanting to continue to drive down costs.
Yeah. We get contacted every so often by institutions that want to change, and the first thing we do is try to talk them out of it. Let's look at what you should be paying. We leverage our market intelligence to show them, and 9 times in 10 they don't do it. So we'll pause here for a poll question. Ashley, why don't you take it from here?
Okay, great. So we're going to launch our second poll here. And the question is, do you believe your institution is paying more than 10% above current fair market value? And our answer options, A, no, B, absolutely, maybe even more, C, it's a mystery to us, or D, I'd rather not guess. We'll keep this open now for about a minute, and thank you so much for your participation.
As we've conducted these surveys and case studies over these last few years, it's been remarkable to us to find out just how many institutions don't actually know what they're paying the vendor. And a lot of that has to do by design. Again, Bob and I are former vendors, and while they're all doing a very important service, the way they provide the services and the way they charge for them can be extremely confusing. And so it's, I'd say, Bob, how often are folks surprised to find out what they're actually paying when we go through an assessment with them?
Almost every time. By the time you factor in the one-time, the monthly, the annual license fees, and each core provider masks those in different ways, not necessarily to really be evasive, but just their billing that's not one of their priorities, is to make the billing transparent to you and to make sure you know exactly how much you're giving them every year. So there is no real nice model of, you go through and check with Fiserv and say, well, how much am I paying every month and what am I paying each year and what's my total cost of ownership? They truly want you to have to figure that out at the end of the game.
Mm-hmm. So how'd the poll come out, Ashley?
All right. right, so 9% said no, 40% said absolutely, maybe even more, 11% said it's a mystery, and 40% said I'd rather not guess. So
I'm guessing they'd rather not guess because they don't want to know the answer, right?
exactly.
That's fair. Well, and when we started Paladin, the epiphany was that we realized there was no place, no resource for bankers to go to understand what they should be paying for services before they renewed that contract or signed that new contract or purchased that new service. So in essence, we become a blue book. In the same way, before you buy a car, you go to a blue book, or before you bid on a house, you go to the MLS. So those results aren't remarkable, and we would expect that. So here's a little bit of research we've done. Again, we're still kind of in the think about it before you jump. We did a look-back survey of over 1,112 banks, to be exact. 105 of those banks responded that they had converted in the 2009 to 2012 period. And you'll see, for those that converted their core services, so we're talking account processing, item processing, ATM, EFT, only 1 in 4 felt it was better, 2 in 5 more efficient, less than half felt it was less expensive, almost nobody felt it was more competitive, and almost nobody felt it was worth the conversion effort. We'll summarize what that means here in a second. However, when you look at those folks, of the 1,112 that responded, 78 of them had converted internet banking and bill pay services, and these are the client-facing services. 75% was an improvement. It's more efficient, better value, more competitive, and absolutely worth the conversion effort. So we segment these two things out to really prove a bigger point that Bob and I share and the rest of our team shares with folks that we get a chance to work with across the U.S. A core is a core is a core. Today, after all consolidation, whether you're with Jack Henry or Fidelity or Fiserv, it could be Jack 2020 or Fiserv Precision Premier or Bank Pack, it doesn't matter. The back office services are back office services. The grass really isn't greener on the other side when it comes to that. However, when it comes time, when you're thinking about changing vendors, and specifically for competitive purposes, client-facing change seems to be the place where it makes the most sense, as you saw on the look-back poll we just showed you. And then, in general, I think everyone will agree with this. It's got to be worth the pain. And a conversion is painful no matter how you slice it. Is it as painful as it was 10 years ago, Bob? Probably not, but still painful, right?
Absolutely. And I thought your slide a couple back where you were talking about only 9% out of those over 1,000 banks actually even tried to make that conversion. So those statistics were of those that actually decided to go ahead and move forward. You've got the other 91% that said, after all this formal RFP process and all this information gathering and all these demos, they all stayed with the same core at the end. Okay. So I thought that was a telling piece of information as well.
So we're just about done talking you out of changing, or at least getting you to think about it. Look at the market first, understand what you should be doing before you jump, if you decide to jump. We have a poll question. Ashley.
Okay. Our third question is, are you considering changing to a different core vendor? We'll leave this open for about a minute again, and the answer options are no, yes, only if we cannot get a lower price or financial incentives from them, yes, they cannot support our needs no matter what we pay them, or I'd rather not say.
So this is a trick question, but we'll tell them the trick after they respond. You know where this is going, right, Bob?
Yes.
Okay.
We should just get some Jeopardy music here. Dun, dun,
I know.
dun, dun. Go ahead.
All right, 56% said no. 12% said yes, only if we cannot get a lower price or financial incentives from them. 12% said yes, they cannot support our needs no matter what we pay. And 21% said I'd rather not say.
Okay, good. The point in this poll is if you, for those that answered yes, only if we cannot get a lower price, it's really important that you don't use an RFP process or vendor selection process, smart vendor selection process, as a way to extract an improved cost savings. It's bad form. Again, speaking as a former vendor, you've got to be married to these folks for many years. Inside baseball at a vendor, when these sort of tactics are employed, it doesn't benefit anyone. Yeah, you'll get a discount, but you're going to lose a lot of favor in the process. So we really advocate that you only change if you really need to change, and that's where a C. If it can't support you, you gotta change, and that's good to see. And Bob, any thoughts?
You know, I agree with what you're saying, and that C option is the one option that really, that is the time to actually look at other core providers. But I will tell you, 90% of the banks that I talk to, when they are, nope, they can't satisfy our needs. When you drill down to it, it is typically a customer service or service level type negotiation that really needs to take place there. Very often, the core processor, once you get a signed agreement, goes away from you, and you don't see him for 5 to 7 years. And so, you know, I've really, even in contract negotiations, have been able to repair those type of relationships where it's not necessarily that the product line just isn't matching up with what the bank's trying to do. It's more that the customer service levels, and you're just not appreciated, and you're not being heard. And those things can be repaired. So.
And I think the 56% of the audience that said they were not considering a vendor selection, I think those must be our fans, Bob, because they're just here to hear us.
Either that or those who have ever gone through a conversion.
They know better.
Do one or two of those in your banking career, and you realize afterwards that wasn't any fun at all.
And you know. Market consolidation reality. Just in a general sense, I know when I got started in the early 90s, there might have been 50, 60, 40 vendors. There's really only about 5 anymore. You know who they are. You'd argue that there's maybe 10, maybe 15, but really at the end of the day, there's only going to be about 5 standing. And we're almost there. Yes, there are other regional players, and some of you may be using them. However, they're going to be reselling someone else's services typically. You know, they'll be reselling Fidelity's services or Fiserv services. There's not many homegrown, standalone core processors out there anymore. Every core offers a full suite of products. There used to be a time where you would go to Fiserv, for example, and they didn't have a good bill payment service. You had to go to CheckFree to get it. Well, Fiserv bought CheckFree. So there isn't a core that you can go to that doesn't give you a 360-degree product suite. The days of picking and choosing are kind of over. The market consolidation is going to continue, as witnessed last year when CSI, one of the 5 that are remaining, purchased a company called Height out of Colorado. So you can expect IT companies to starting to get acquired, and they'll now they'll be providing core and IT services under one brand. However, while you don't have a lot of choice remaining, and few less over the next few years, when it comes to internet banking, bill payment, mobile payment, there are a lot of competitors there. There's at least 12 to 15 very strong internet banking options out there. All of them integrate very nicely with any of the cores. And I would expect that to grow and expand over the years. And again, I think this is driving the previous slide where we talked about the benefits appear to be if you're going to change vendors, which vendors you're going to change. So let's move on to actually selecting the best provider and go over the smart vendor selection process. And some more cowboy wisdom. It don't take a genius to spot a goat in a flock of sheep. I love that one. And timing has a lot to do with the rain dance. Timing is important. And so if you are deciding, if you are considering not changing but renewing, this is the last thing we'll say on this, here's the best time to renew. You should have 18 to 30 months remaining on your current agreement. That's the best time to renew. That's when the vendors are going to be most flexible with their pricing, and that's when you're going to get the best terms and conditions. You should be adding other products and services, and you should be generally happy with the vendor. Sometimes we've talked to folks that are not happy with their vendor, but as soon as they find out they can pay them $1 million less, suddenly they're very happy with the vendor and they want to stay. So, consider that in your critical thinking. You should be, cost reduction should be a strategy if you're going to renew. You should be looking at growth of the next term of the agreement. And if you're considering a merger or acquisition, we did a program with Wolf a few months back where we talked specifically about restructuring agreements to be beneficial to shareholders. That's an important consideration if you're renewing, and it's much better to get those terms into an existing agreement with an incumbent than it is to get them into a new agreement with a new vendor. Our research tells us if you try to renew your agreement with less than 12 months, you're half as less likely to get the best deal as opposed to renewing with 18 to 30 on that. If you want more information on that after the meeting, just contact us and we'll explain why. So, Bob, any comments on that last slide? We pretty much covered it, I think.
Correct. Other than I will tell you that I do get a lot of bankers asking me, do I have to wait till the very end of my term before my new contract goes into effect? And that answer is no.
No.
Part of starting between 18 and 30 months is one of the benefits is to get that new contract in effect as early as possible.
Yeah. RFPs are dead. If you visit our blog, wrote an article last year about this, and it got a lot of attention. We got a lot of negative attention from people that do RFPs or consultants do them. We don't do them. We advise you not to do them. Why? Well, there's very few vendors to choose from. When RFPs were in vogue, there was 20, 30 vendors. You really did not know what was out there. But because there's so few vendors, it's not even necessary. Each vendor has a boilerplate. And based on your size and perhaps where you're located and what kind of business you're in, when you go to Jack Henry, they're going to offer you 2020 or Silver Lake. If you go to Fiserv, it's Precision, Premier, or Signature. If you go to Fidelity, they have their boilerplate offerings. So the vendors are stratifying their clients based on asset size and directing them and putting incentives in front of these different options. We've worked with folks that have argued for different options, and the vendors go kicking and screaming. So you can, this is the reality. So RFPs don't really flesh out and help you with a selection of which platform is right. The vendors already know what's right because everything is basically settled in. There's very little insight that an RFP will provide you that a good round of demos will not. There's a firm out in California that we just talked to a vendor that a bank hired to help them with their RFP process, and they issued out a 140-page RFP. And some of the questions, I couldn't even believe that they were asking vendors to respond to this. Vendors don't like it. It's a tremendous waste of time for the bank. A lot of the questions aren't of value. And again, you can get this in a demo. There's an old mindset that regulators care. They did, but they don't so much anymore. What regulators want to see is that you're conducting due diligence and you're going through a process. No one says it's got to be a 120-page RFP process that lasts a year to a year and a half. And they don't say that it can't be a 90-day process like smart vendor selection. They just want the due diligence done. No matter what you do with a vendor on RFP, they know how to make the responses confusing as possible. I can't tell you how many RFPs we have collected that have an inch of dust on them because they got them, they looked at them, put them on the shelf, and they really were of no retained value to making their decision at the end of the day. And this is interesting. Most vendors are very good at making a no a yes. So no matter what you put in your RFP to kind of pull back the sheets, they're going to make it look pretty. Bob, I'm sure you've got a couple comments here.
I do. One of the most common ones is how easy to use is your teller application, and vendors love that type of response. So what you're really trying to get to is, look, is your teller system integrated with your loan platform so that you've got some kind of a tickler system involved so that you can go through and a teller can go through and let a loan officer know that that one of your customers has just shown up and he owes $50,000 and needs to sign some paperwork. And so really, even when you get to the real ugly RFP, and you've got 120 questions, you never tend to get granular enough to really be able to nail down a true differentiator between teller platforms, for example. It's just one situation.
And in an age where a core is a core is a core, who cares? I mean, they all can provide the same level of functionality. Well, maybe not the same level, but they can all provide the same functionality. You just have to decide which one is the feature functionality you want. And that's why if you'll agree with us that RFPs are dead and really a colossal waste of time, then you'll agree that it always comes down to price. As a former vendor, I don't know how many times we responded to RFPs, to the RFPs being set aside, and it came down to how much are you going to charge me for the services. And so if it's going to come down to price, and there's research, market intelligence, and pricing data available out on the market that you can access before you even engage a vendor, why not access that information first and identify which vendors you'll be able to afford in the same way that you refer to a Blue Book or the MLS before you make a bid on a house? Why not start there as opposed to going down the long, drawn-out, classic RFP process, which we've outlined here. Typical RFP, and I'm sure everyone on the line will have a different experience with what an RFP looks like, shorter or longer, but they start with an internal needs analysis. Someone inside the bank or credit union has to generate an RFP and distribute it, typically to more than 5 vendors, but again, there's really not more than 5 vendors out there. Then the responses have to come back, which are quite confusing, difficult to discern, and hard to make heads or tails of. Product demos happen anyway. So if you start with 5 to 7 vendors and you whittle it down to 4 vendors, to get 4 or 5 vendors through a product demo, that's 30 to 60 days. And then you can begin selecting your vendor and negotiating a contract. 9 months to a year and a half, or we have here a year to a year and a half to really do it right. Smart vendor selection, on the other hand, is a much shorter, much more respectful and sensitive, time-sensitive process to the organization, and one that gets you everything you've ever wanted from a vendor to help you make your decision, but in far less time and much more efficient. It begins with actually selecting the candidates that you should look at the beginning of the process based on modeling what you're currently doing with your incumbent vendor against market intelligence and pricing data that's available out on the market. Once you've narrowed down to 2 or 3 vendors, again, each vendor is going to put you in a solution based on your size anyway. There's not many options. You then begin a demo round, which takes about a month, and we recommend something called a scorecard process. We'll touch on this briefly, but this is a very effective process to make sure that the demonstration of the services match and are in perfect alignment with the strategy and the feature functionality that every department of your bank wants. Much better than the traditional product demo stage used in the RFP process. And then take 2 months to select your vendor and conclude contract negotiations. Smart vendor selection, which in essence you're starting with all the decision intelligence in the beginning, it's a much shorter process. And I think you're getting the logic. The logic really is we all agree there are few vendor choices today. And because every vendor is going to put you into a solution, it really matters, it really only matters whether or not that vendor can do what you're doing today plus answer the products that you anticipate implementing in the next 3 to 5 years. So then it really matters who is charging the least for the same functionality that you have today. And that's why smart vendor selection begins with doing investment and ownership expense research without engaging vendors in a lengthy RFP process. It's very possible for a company like Paladin to look at a few of your invoices and using our market intelligence tell you exactly what it would cost to switch to Jack Henry, to Fidelity, to Fiserv, to OSI, whoever it might be, before you even get started, and that narrows down your process, and then you may begin your selection. Bob, I'm sure you've got a couple points here.
You know, the only other thing I wanted to mention, one of the things a banker will ask very typically is, well, I've heard that Jack Henry is just so much better than all the others, and that certain people have come to the bank and have really liked this product. When you really narrow down to determining which is the best core, and I get asked that a lot, and by the way, they're all, as Aaron mentioned, the same. You may find one has a little different look or feel, or one may have a little different in feature functionality, but over the entire process, and when you look at the overall effect to your organization, there is just not a compelling story typically to motivate you to take your organization through the transition, moving from one core to another. And so with that as kind of a premise, the rest of this really does come down to cost. And I know bankers, we all hate to, we all want to put out the best product that we can, but really the major element here is cost when you're talking about core contracts.
So just to dive a little deeper into the three-step process for smart vendor selection, the first step is you get an outside firm or you access market intelligence that's available today to you and model and forecast what you would be paying with any of the candidate vendors you might be selecting to or switching to in advance. Obviously, you've got to factor in separation expense and conversion expense. This can be estimated pretty closely. And you narrow it down to 2 or 3 vendor candidates. All of them have in common the fact that they're less expensive than what you're paying right now. The next step is a month or so of demos using the scorecard process. The scorecards are organized for each department and critical function, and it permits the individual users of the system inside your franchise to rate each demo on feature, functionality, and the contribution to the overall strategic goals. And Bob, since you run our scorecard process and you're one of the guys that really pioneered this across the country, what can you add here?
And this is a very interesting aspect. We find a lot of traditional RFP providers want to come in and do a needs analysis and spend 30 to 60 days to, quite frankly, get to a point where you already are, where they try and discover what you need. I have developed scorecards based on sending one email out to all employees saying, you can change one thing about your core processing, what would you change? And quite honestly, that gets to a very specific, your operations person is going to tell you very specifically what they don't like about the system. As opposed to if you go into a demo and you ask any of the core providers, hey, show us your back office operations function, they're going to show you everything they want to show you, or their new teller platform, they're going to show you everything they want to show you. And at the end of that demo, you may have gotten 15 or 20 minutes of actual, oh, this is stuff that was actually interesting to me. What we do is we flip that demo process on its head, start with the scorecards in a very strict agenda to the demo providers and say, answer these questions for us. During that time, we will get to see your product and we'll get to see the ease of use and those kind of things. But really, we want you to answer these 10 or 15 or 20 scorecard items. And it makes it very easy for someone to sit through a demo and go through and go, I give that an 8, or this is a 2, and this is a showstopper. We don't like this product anymore. So that's exactly what a scorecard does, implies is exactly what we do, is we try and give you an easy way of managing and controlling that agenda.
And Ashley, if anyone on the call would like examples of scorecards or know more about how to develop them, we'd be happy to share our insight with that, because they can certainly do it on their own. But we have a lot of information we could share if someone after the call wanted to do that. Then the next phase is actually selecting your vendor. And since we're focused on lowest expense with all the same feature functionality or improved feature functionality, The next phase is contract negotiations, and we at Paladin like to talk about playing poker with your vendor. We use this analogy because it's important to remember that vendors play poker every single day with bankers just like you all across the country. They are experts. They know what's in your hand. They know what's in their hand. And believe you me, being a former vendor, they know what's in the deck. And if you can acknowledge that negotiating with vendors is only something you get to do every 5 to 7 years or when you select a vendor, it's really important that you get in possession of as much market intelligence and pricing data as you can in advance of a negotiation to improve your odds of winning. So many, in that previous poll, we had 21% would rather not say if they're changing, what was it? It's a mystery to us, I'm sorry. 11% said it's a mystery to us if they're paying more, and 40% said they'd rather not guess, and another 40% said they're absolutely paying more. But what you don't know is exactly how much more. The vendor will throw a discount on the table and, hey, this is normally $250,000 to install this stuff or do this conversion, but I'll mark it down to $125,000. You might find out it could have been for free. And that's why getting this market intelligence in advance is so critical to your success, because you're going to have to live with those mistakes for the next 5 to 7 years. Smart vendor selection, I think we've handed home, begins with getting the market intelligence and pricing data up front. There are companies like Paladin out there that can provide this to you. And this eliminates unnecessary process and RFPs. You should really only exercise your vendors at the appropriate times. Being former vendors, an RFP is not a good exercise for vendor. It's best to use vendors for demos and helping understand ways they can make your operation more efficiency, operational assessments, things like this. You'll get more out of a vendor doing that than you will from the other ways to exercise them. Negotiate from a position of strength, having all the cards in your hand, and getting outside help can be helped. We certainly couldn't end a presentation without identifying that there are some benefits to outside help, and there are some benefits, obviously, to not. But what we've learned is that when you have outside help, the outside help can be objective. These relationships with your vendors can be very close. It's hard to do the arm twisting of someone that you may be fishing with or that you worked with for 15 years. Vendors take it more seriously when outsiders are present. They tend to respond. And if they're sitting down with someone like us, they know that we know what they know. We have the cards that you normally would not have. They understand that. They're more respectful to the process, and the likelihood of a favorable outcome is greater. Having the market knowledge, outside folks, each of you are regionalized. You share information in user groups, and you go to regional conferences. There are companies out there, obviously, folks like us and others that have a national perspective. It's important to know what institutions are doing in Texas and California and Florida and Washington and what they're paying for those services and bringing that into your vendor selection process. And we have a poll. Ashley, I think this is the final poll.
Yes, this is the final poll. And the question is, have you ever used market intelligence and pricing data from an industry research and consulting firm? And your answer choices are no, we didn't know that the market data was available to bankers. No, we'd rather guess at the numbers. Yes, results were favorable. Yes, results were not favorable. Or I'd rather not say. So we'll keep this open for a minute for you guys.
Bob, any color to add to this slide, sir?
You know, I did want to mention when you're using an outside service, I agreed with your benefits. I did want to let you know that, you know, Paladin, one of Paladin's differences is that our goal at the end of the negotiation is for the core provider to feel like they've got a good, solid contract, and also the banker to feel like they've gotten a good deal. We are absolutely the bank advocate, but part of our process is to try and make sure, look, if there are other services the core could be providing you and those kind of things, we want to make sure we do that as well. So even though it sounds sometimes like it's arm wrestling and that kind of stuff, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that core relationship is still strong with that bank.
It's a win-win, and again, speaking as former vendors, I sound like a broken record. Beating up your vendor is not the way to extract the right pricing, but sitting down in a professional negotiation and them understanding that you have the same cards that they have is a great way to get things to the mat quickly and get it over efficiently. In 60 to 90 days, you've got a new agreement with a new vendor or the existing vendor in place. So how the poll come, Ashley?
All right, 46% said no, I didn't know the market data was available to bankers. No one said that they'd rather guess, which is good.
This is a smart group.
23% said yes, the results were favorable.
23, you said?
23, yep.
Okay.
4% said yes, the results were not favorable, and 27% said that they'd rather not say.
Good. Yes. Good results all the way across. I think they speak for themselves. So we'll conclude here. Thank you so much for your time today, everybody. And Ashley, if there are questions, Bob and I would love to spend some time answering them, and we certainly are available afterwards. We always like to interact with folks and provide them as much information as we can. And our goal out there is to provide research that senior executives of institutions can use and leverage to level the playing field and really get the best deals they possibly can out of these vendors and services. Ashley, were there any questions that people have posed?
Yep, we do have a few questions, and just so the audience knows, we have about 10 more minutes. So if you haven't sent in your questions and you do have some, please send them in to me now so we can get to them in the next 10 minutes. And otherwise, like Aaron said, please feel free to jot down his contact information and reach out to him after the presentation. So our first question is, why are bankers just now in caps, learning about the smart vendor selection process?
Well, the smart vendor selection process existence is tied to the availability of market intelligence, and since I think we were the first firm to actually be founded for the purpose of building that database, they kind of go hand in glove. So I think it's not possible to now. It's kind of like, how come you couldn't have booked airline tickets online until now? Well, a few things had to happen, internet, competition, things like this. So it's just a sign, we're in an information age, and there's folks out there that are leveling the playing field. So that's why. Good question.
Great. Our next question is, why do vendors provide confusing responses to RFPs that bankers send?
Bob, why don't you answer that one?
That's real interesting. Part of it is that the core vendor really wants you to be confused and wants to give a very generic answer. Very often when you do a full RFP, you're not dealing with your salesman. You're dealing with another entire branch within the core vendor area just to deal with RFPs. So they don't really know your organization, and they really want to get you to the demo as fast as they can. And so, honestly, it's not in their best efforts to try and do a full illuminating RFP. And they're not spending a whole lot of thought-provoking time on those. Typically, they're cut and pasting things into your format, trying to give you that cookie-cutter yes answer to everything.
Any more?
Great. We do have one more. Let's see. Actually, we have two more.
Okay.
How are you able to obtain market data? Where do you get the data?
It's top secret. We'd have to kill you if we told you. It actually is. It's quite proprietary how we do it, and it was an epiphany that came to me in 2007 that got me to say I'm going to start Paladin to do this. But I can tell you the general structure of it is we collect the data through double-blind surveys that we conduct on a regular basis, where we get qualitative data from bankers all across the United States. We amend that with quantifiable data, which we get through our studies. You might recall in the previous slide, we've conducted over 150 assessments where we've worked with institutions that actually share the data, so we've amassed a database of thousands of different contracts, and invoices, and tens of thousands of pricing points. And then we've done over 50 case studies that help us actually establish where fair market is. And all of this information is organized in a knowledge base that we use that permits us to very quickly estimate what someone should be paying based on all kinds of factors. So it's quite remarkable, very comprehensive. It's not rocket science, but you know, a lot of the methods, you know, are proprietary. But needless to say, to date, bankers that have leveraged the intelligence have cut their costs by over $50 million, about $54 million to date. And on average, each institution that uses the market intelligence we provide them, they cut their costs by $765,000 per institution over the life of their contract. The smallest I've seen leveraging our data is in a couple $100,000 in expense reduction, and the most I've seen is in excess of several $1 million in cost reduction. And those are all institutions mostly between a couple $100 million and, say, $2 billion in size.
And something I wanted to point out is that Paladin does not share the information that, oh, bank name next door is actually paying 13% less than you are. That is one of the areas where we do maintain that vendor integrity, but we don't have to tell you that the bank next door is charging you is being charged 13% less. We can say the fair market value based on your current contract is 38% above what you should be paying. And so that's the differentiator and allows us to gather and query banks and ask for that information. We don't use their specific name, but we will tell you that a Fiserv bank in this region of the country typically has a fair market value price of this.
Yeah. Good question.
And our next question, in general, where do you guys see that most banks are overpaying? Internet banking, debit cards, mobile, etc.
Not in mobile yet, because mobile's relatively new. They're probably paying a premium, but they haven't been acquiring that service long enough for there to be, you know, still the wild, wild west on mobile. But we can. I think I can answer it slightly, a little differently. The best. We actually provided a study last year that stratified where the savings is coming from. In 2009, I can't do it off the top of my head, 2009, 2010, most of the savings was coming from account processing, internet banking, and bill payment. In 2010 and 2011, there's less savings coming from item processing because with Check 21 and all that the service is dying over time. It's highly commodified. Still account processing, but more internet banking, bill pay, EFT. And we think that is occurring, that there's more meat on the bones there because the folks that are using internet banking today, well, everyone is, they adopted those services kind of at the beginning of the growth curve of that technology, kind of in the same way that people are acquiring mobile banking now. So as with anything that's new, you're paying more to acquire it to be competitive. And so as you get down the road a few years and there's more competition, it's less expensive. So in short, I think most of the cost reduction comes out of internet banking, bill pay, EFT, ATM, but account processing is a strong second place. And then a third would be item processing. And then also there's a lot of crazy pricing going on with new products and services. It's amazing what a vendor in New Hampshire will charge for the same exact service that a bank is paying nothing for in Arizona. And you know, we bring that information to bear. So, but we actually have a study that if someone wanted, I could dig it up, that we published a year and a half ago that stratifies this, and they can certainly read that. It's called their Trust but Verify research study.
Great. Another question, does Paladin do any type of consultant work for any core vendors?
No. No, absolutely not. We have no alliance whatsoever with any core vendor. We only represent bankers. Bob and I, we like to joke. We're like you know, recently out of jail, now working for the police. So
That's a
no,
good analogy.
absolutely not. And we're completely vendor agnostic. We don't care who the vendor is. Our data is not, it's objective, quantified data. It doesn't weigh based on what we think is better. But we certainly give our opinion. Doesn't matter to us.
Great. And lastly, how is Paladin's pricing parameters established for your services?
How is our pricing parameters established? It all depends on what we're doing. If the institution simply wants to know what the data is, and we provide them a blue book that says here's exactly what you should be paying and here are the terms and conditions you should have in your agreement, and they go and negotiate it on their own, and they don't need us to do that, we simply, there's a fee for the value of the data that we're providing them, and it all depends. If they want us to do everything for them, we tell them in advance exactly how much they're overpaying, we tell them what they should be paying, and then we go and do it for them. We typically work on a small flat fee plus a percentage of the success. So we're always tying the outcome. If you win, we win, and so we're always shoulder to shoulder. And then we have a third model, which is strictly if we're renewing an existing agreement, we will work strictly on contingency, and we don't get paid until the bank or the credit union signs the deal with the vendor. So if we can't get it to the finish line, we can't really earn anything. And so it's really much a partnership, and that's why not representing vendors or having anything to do with the vendors is super critical to our advantage in the marketplace. And what makes our research so valuable is that it's not skewed for those purposes.
Great. Well, that's all the questions that we have for today. Perfect timing. And I want to thank you both for taking the time to present. We've heard a lot of great information this last hour. And before I conclude, I just wanted to bring the audience's attention to what's on the screen right now. The FMS East Coast Regional Conference is taking place on September 16th through the 18th in Newcastle, New Hampshire. And both Wolf & Company as well as Paladin are both sponsors of this event. So we do hope to see you there.
And I'm speaking at this event, actually.
Aaron is speaking.
Yes.
More intense. Will you be touching upon this?
Yeah, actually we'll be diving more into, it'll be more on we'll be exposing a lot more research on what for bankers that decide to renegotiate their existing services, that 18 to 42% we talk about that's possible. We talk a lot more about the research specifically on renegotiating current agreements, restructuring current agreements as opposed to switching vendors.
All right, great. So as a reminder to our audience, copies of today's presentation are available at www.wolfandco.com/news/webinar_library. And I'll also be posting a recording of this presentation to the same web address later on today. Immediately following the conclusion of this webinar, you'll have the opportunity to complete a survey. And we do appreciate your feedback so we can continue to improve our webinar program. And as always, we appreciate your attendance. And Aaron and Bob, thanks so much for spending time with us today. A lot of great information that you guys had to offer. And thank you to the audience for spending your afternoon with us. And we look forward to your participation in future webinars. And I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you very much, Ashley, for having us.
Sure.
Bye-bye.